All right, welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. It was some news that broke earlier this evening and something we've been tracking closely. A U.S. trade court earlier today blocking President Trump's tariffs from going into effect in a sweeping ruling that the president overstepped his authority by imposing across-the-board duties on imports from nations that sell more to the United States than they buy. The Court of International Trade said that the U.S. Constitution gives Congress exclusive authority to regulate commerce with other countries that is not overridden by the president's emergency powers to safeguard the U.S. economy. Let's talk about this with Paul Mueller. He's a senior research fellow with the American Institute for Economic Research. Thanks for coming on at the late hour, Paul. I was reading about this today. The Court of International Trade. This is something we were all in the newsroom when we were seeing these news reports come in. What is the Court of International Trade, and how much power do they have to wield over a matter like this?
Well, they are in charge of, looking over trade policy in terms of what the U.S. government is doing when it comes to trade policy, particularly tariffs. So there are other kinds of trade restrictions that would fall under their jurisdiction. And this is a big deal. I mean, this is them pointing out that the president really has overstepped his authority here, that he is sort of acting unilaterally to try to reorder the global trade system. And their argument is that that power rests with Congress. There's a couple exceptions that we'll get into here, I imagine. But beyond those exceptions where Congress has ceded power to the president, the power to tax, and particularly to tax international trade, remains with Congress.
Yeah, what are the exceptions?
Well, so the exceptions, there have been a couple over the years. The most recent one and the most relevant one is Section 232. And Section 232 is where Congress has given the president the authority to negotiate on matters of national security. So when there are specific defense issues, so you can think about steel and aluminum tariffs, those have been classic Section 232 issues going back a long way. So the president has a narrow authority to impose tariffs that are related to a clear national security, national defense kind of issue. But the sweeping broad tariffs are far beyond what Section 232 was written for.
So remind us, and this was another question we all had in the newsroom when this story came up. Where do we have these tariffs implemented right now? You mentioned sweeping tariffs. So what exactly does this stop?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's hard to keep track of all the different tariffs that are going on. So we have elevated tariffs with China that are in place. They've come down from what they were pretty dramatically a couple weeks ago. We have the framework of a trade deal with the UK, where UK trade barriers have come down some, but the US tariff is higher than it used to be. And then we have a variety of tariffs that have been in place when it comes to auto parts or other countries. But again, it's hard to keep track of the postponements that are going on. So most recently, there were tariffs that were set to go into effect on the EU on June 1st or June 2nd, maybe. And those have been punted to July. So it's all over the place. And again, President Trump has been using these as negotiating tools. And so the basic 10% universal tariff, I think, is in place across the board. But the bilateral Liberation Day tariffs have mostly been postponed, other than with China and this sort of deal that's been worked out with the UK.
So how does the appeal process work with something like this? Presumably we will see an appeal. How does an appeal work with the Court of International Trade? Do we know?
Well, I imagine that because these are U.S. judges, that it would make its way up the federal circuit. So I don't know if it'll go directly to Supreme Court or if it has another layer before it gets there. But this, I think, is going to move its way up very quickly because it's one of those issues of separation of powers. I mean, this ruling here and the issues that are involved are deep constitutional issues that need to be kind of clarified, worked out, and defined by the courts so that we have a clear understanding of what presidents are allowed to do, what Congress has the authority to do, what they've so far delegated. And once we get clarity on that, then Congress can decide whether to act, whether they're going to grant more powers to the president, or perhaps President Trump will try to work through Congress to try to get them to impose some of the tariffs he'd like to see. But my guess, again, on reading the Constitution and the law here, is that this ruling is likely to be upheld.
What does this mean for businesses and for consumers, this news tonight?
Well, it means that the uncertainty perhaps is coming to an end, although it's not quite certain yet. So we'll see what the appeal is. But this would again have huge ramifications. I mean, it would really pull this whole uncertainty off the table if President Trump cannot pass these sort of unilateral tariffs across all these different countries, postpone them at will, raise them at will, drop them at will. If all of this is negated, that gives a great deal more confidence to the business community. And to be honest, I think this is going to be good for the Trump administration. The tariffs have always been a bit of an oddball policy with his other pro-growth policies, with low energy prices, deregulation, the tax cut bill that's working its way through Congress. Those are all very pro-growth. But economists have been very clear from the get-go that tariffs are not pro-growth in nature. They tend to protect specific industries, specific groups of people, so labor unions tend to like them. The industries that are protected by tariffs tend to like them. But when it comes to economic growth, the history here is very clear that they tend not to be pro-growth. So in a way, if this ruling is upheld, it might be for President Trump's benefit that this sort of anti-growth policy, this albatross around his neck, is being taken away, and he can also no longer pursue this without losing face, right? He can tell his supporters, look, the Supreme Court has ruled, my hands are tied, there's nothing I can do. And he could just let the other pro growth policies kick in, let the economy grow and take off. And that I think will have very positive political outcomes as well as economic benefits for the US people.
Paul Mueller is with the American Institute for Economic Research. Thanks for coming on. Talk soon.
Thanks for having me.